Christmas is supposed to be the one day people cling to hope, especially when life is already crushing them. But for a struggling father named Ethan Carter, that hope shattered in the worst possible way when his landlord showed up, with cold paperwork and colder intentions, forcing his family out into the freezing night with nowhere to go. Bro, just imagining kids watching Christmas lights through a car window while their entire world collapses genuinely hit hard. Ethan had spent months trying to stay afloat after layoffs, skipped meals so his wife and children could eat, and believed if he just held on long enough, things would somehow improve. But his landlord, Victor Langley, didn't care about excuses, timing, or humanity. He wanted them gone immediately. What nobody expected, though, was how brutally life would flip the script only 3 months later. When the same landlord who destroyed their Christmas would end up desperate, humiliated, and begging Ethan for something he never imagined he'd need. To Ethan Carter had never imagined his life would unravel this fast. Just a year earlier, he had been the kind of father who quietly carried the pressure without complaint. The type of guy who worked overtime, fixed things around the apartment himself, and somehow still found energy to laugh with his kids after exhausting shifts. He lived in a modest apartment with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children in a neighborhood where people mostly kept to themselves. But everyone understood survival looked different for each family. Ethan wasn't wealthy, not even close, but there was dignity in how hard he fought to keep things steady. Then everything shifted. A sudden company downsizing wiped out his warehouse management job almost overnight, and the bills immediately started piling up faster than reality could be processed. Bro, hearing situations like this genuinely feels terrifying because it happens way more often than people think. One bad month becomes 3, and suddenly people are choosing between groceries and rent while pretending everything is okay, in front of their kids. At first, Ethan tried to keep things together with short-term jobs, delivery work, overnight shifts, and freelance labor wherever he could find it. He sold old electronics, canceled subscriptions, skipped meals, and quietly drained what little savings remained without making a spectacle of it. Sarah started sewing clothes for neighbors to bring in extra money while reassuring the kids that Christmas would still be special, even though she secretly cried in the bathroom after everyone went to sleep. Ethan hated seeing that look in her eyes, the exhausted optimism that people wear when they're trying desperately not to break apart. The rent slipped behind by 1 month, then 2. Every payment Ethan made felt like trying to stop floodwater with bare hands. Still, he believed effort mattered. He believed if he explained things honestly, people would understand. That belief lasted until Victor Langley knocked on the door. Victor owned multiple rental properties across town, had built a reputation nobody said out loud, but everybody quietly understood. He smiled only when paperwork benefited him, treated tenants like numbers on spreadsheets, and somehow always acted inconvenienced by ordinary human problems. Ethan had heard rumors before, but assumed stories got exaggerated. Then Victor stood inside their apartment one freezing December afternoon, sharply dressed, perfectly polished, barely glancing at the struggling family standing in front of him like they were interruptions to his schedule. Ethan explained everything carefully. He talked about job applications, temporary work, payment plans, promises to catch up after the holidays. Anything that bought time. Sarah stood nearby clutching a stack of partially paid bills while the kids sat quietly in the next room, pretending not to listen. That silence alone says everything. Honestly, kids always know more than adults think. Victor listened with the emotional warmth of an unpaid parking ticket. He reminded Ethan of lease obligations, penalties, overdue balances, and legal notices already filed. He mentioned deadlines with the same tone someone uses ordering coffee. Ethan offered partial payments. Victor rejected them. Ethan proposed installments. Victor dismissed them. And what genuinely felt unreal was the timing. Christmas week. Of all weeks, most people would wait a few extra days out of basic decency, right? Apparently not Victor. The pressure inside the apartment started changing after that meeting. Christmas decorations stayed up, but nobody looked at them anymore. Sarah wrapped tiny dollar store gifts while pretending excitement for the children. And Ethan spent nights applying for jobs until sunrise, running on panic disguised as determination. 40 called charities, searched housing options, begged old friends for leads, and swallowed pride repeatedly, just trying to buy time. Some landlords ignored him immediately after hearing late rent history. Others wanted deposits he couldn't afford. The walls of possibility felt like they were closing in every single day. Then Christmas Eve arrived. Snow drifted against the windows while families nearby celebrated inside warm homes glowing with lights, music, and dinners Ethan's family could practically smell from the parking lot. Ethan had managed to scrape together enough ingredients for a simple meal, trying to manufacture normalcy for the kids, convincing himself maybe, just maybe, that Victor would wait until after the holiday. That hope disappeared when a hard knock echoed through the apartment. And what happened next completely changed the course of everyone's lives. The knock at the door didn't feel normal. Ethan later described it as the kind of sound that instantly tells you life is about to split into a before and after. The apartment had been unusually quiet just moments earlier. Christmas lights blinking weakly in the corner while Sarah tried forcing cheer into a dinner nobody had the appetite to eat. The kids sat on the couch holding tiny wrapped presents, still young enough to believe tomorrow might somehow erase all. The tension hanging over the room. Then Ethan opened the door and saw Victor Langley standing there beside two officers and a property representative holding paperwork. Bro, this part genuinely made my stomach drop because the timing almost feels unreal. Except people actually do things like this. Victor looked completely unaffected by what was happening around him. No hesitation, no discomfort, not even the awkward guilt most people would probably feel. He calmly explained that enough time had passed. Legal notices had expired, and the eviction would proceed immediately. Immediate on Christmas Eve. 5. Ethan stood frozen, trying to process words that suddenly sounded distant, unreal, almost distorted. Sarah's face dropped instantly when she realized this wasn't another warning. This was final. Ethan begged, not dramatically, not angrily, just desperately. He explained he had interviews lined up after the holiday. He offered to surrender valuables, sign repayment agreements, work maintenance on the property. Anything. He even promised double payments once income stabilized. Victor didn't even entertain the conversation. To him, delays meant weakness, exceptions created inconvenience, and compassion clearly ranked somewhere beneath profit. Margins. Watching someone refuse humanity so casually honestly feels disturbing because you start wondering how disconnected a person has to become. Within an hour, the family's life sat crammed into trash bags and boxes near the curb while freezing wind cut through everything they owned. Their children cried quietly from the back seat of Ethan's old car. Confused why Christmas suddenly meant sleeping under coats instead of waking beside presents, Sarah tried staying composed but eventually broke down when nobody was looking, staring blankly at blinking holiday decorations hanging from buildings across the street like the universe was mocking them. And somehow, unbelievably, Victor delivered one final insult before driving away. He coldly reminded Ethan that abandoned property cleanup fees would still apply if everything wasn't removed by morning. That moment changed something inside Ethan. Not rage, exactly. Something sharper. Something quieter. The kind of pain that stops feeling emotional and starts becoming fuel. Because sitting in that freezing car, listening to his children cry themselves to sleep on Christmas night, Ethan made a promise to himself. If life ever gave him a chance to rise again, he would never forget who stood over his family while they were drowning. 6, and weirdly enough, life was already moving pieces behind the scenes that Victor couldn't possibly see coming. The strange thing about rock bottom is that sometimes it quietly becomes the exact place where everything starts changing. 3 months after that Christmas eviction, Ethan Carter barely recognized his own life. The weeks immediately afterward had been brutal. His family bounced between cheap motels, temporary shelters, and sleeping in borrowed spaces while Ethan worked every shift he could physically survive. Exhaustion became normal. Pride disappeared. Survival took over. But somewhere inside all that chaos, something shifted. One of the job applications Ethan had nearly forgotten about finally turned into an interview, then another, and unexpectedly a full-time operations role at a fast-growing logistics company. It wasn't glamorous, but Ethan attacked it like someone who had seen exactly what failure cost. Long nights became promotions, extra responsibilities became trust, and trust turned into opportunity when company leadership expanded operations and unexpectedly offered Ethan profit sharing in a struggling warehouse division he bailed. Rebuild? Bro, hearing stories like this genuinely blows my mind because sometimes the people who suffer hardest end up developing an insane level of resilience. Ethan wasn't suddenly rich overnight, but for the first time in forever, stability returned. The kids had a home again. Sarah smiled without forcing it. Christmas trauma slowly stopped haunting every quiet moment. Then life delivered the twist nobody could script it better. Victor Langley was collapsing. A reckless property investment tied to debt, lawsuits, and financial overextension had quietly destroyed him. Tenants moved out, lenders tightened pressure, repairs piled up, and suddenly the man who treated people like disposable numbers was desperately searching for solutions. 7, one of Victor's most valuable apartment properties, had become financially toxic, requiring immediate operational restructuring or foreclosure risk. The problem? Ethan's logistics company had recently partnered with a regional property redevelopment group, and Ethan had become one of the decision makers reviewing distressed properties. I genuinely couldn't believe where this was going. When Victor walked into a meeting expecting wealthy investors and consultants, he instead locked eyes with Ethan sitting calmly at the conference table, reviewing paperwork. The silence reportedly lasted several painful seconds. Victor looked older, somehow worn down, nervous in a way Ethan had never seen before. Gone was the polished confidence. Gone was the cold authority. Suddenly, Victor wasn't dictating terms. He was asking for help. And then came the moment nobody saw coming. Victor admitted he needed Ethan's recommendation to secure redevelopment support and avoid complete financial collapse. He even hinted that Ethan's family had once been good tenants and awkwardly suggested maybe they could return to one of the renovated units at discounted rent. The same man who forced children into a freezing car on Christmas was now asking them to come back. Ethan sat there for a long moment, listening carefully while Victor stumbled through explanations that sounded suspiciously close to excuses. The desperation in the room felt impossible to ignore. 3 months earlier, Ethan had begged for empathy and received paperwork. Now the roles had reversed. And honestly, this part felt unbelievably satisfying without becoming cruel. Ethan didn't yell, insult, or humiliate him. He simply stayed calm. He explained that rebuilding trust mattered, that decisions carried consequences, and that families deserved humanity during hard times. Then, in the quietest form of karma imaginable, Ethan declined the offer to return and refused to personally rescue Victor's failing property. 8 business decisions would proceed professionally, nothing personal, but Ethan made one thing clear. His family had already built a better future somewhere else. Walking out beside Sarah later that evening, Ethan looked lighter somehow, not because revenge happened, but because survival had finally turned into peace. And wow, this story genuinely sticks with you because it feels painfully real. That quiet karma hit harder than dramatic revenge ever could. Ethan never became bitter, just stronger. And honestly, that's exactly how real comeback stories land. Bro, the wildest part is how fast power shifts when people mistake temporary struggle for permanent weakness. Victor's thought control lasted forever, but life has a brutal way of testing the same empathy people refuse to show others. If this story hit you hard, imagine what you would have done in Ethan's position, because honestly, this one sparks debate. Would you forgive, walk away, or help? Anyway, drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe for more unbelievable stories. And stick around because the next one gets even crazier.